Heyo guys, welcome back to the Easily Amused Weeb. In this episode, we're going to talk about Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody. This is an anime from the winter season of this year, and it came out with a lot of really great anime, along with some of my personal favorites such as Violet Evergarden and Hakata Tonkotsu Ramen's. Death March is a decent anime, but it was really outshined by the animes that were released around the same time because of the flaws that's in it. In case you're new to this series, I rate animes by my level of enjoyment with them and lightly go over the technicals. I use an enjoyment scale of 1 to 3 and I couple it with a technical scale of 1 to 5. The enjoyment scale categorizes the series by how much fun I feel they are to watch, and when you come to any sort of media, you expect it to be enjoyable to some extent, and that's why I prioritize the scale with my ratings. If you're overly bothered by the technicals of a series, this rating scale of mine may not work for you. I rate this anime a 2E 3 star. This review will have a couple spoilers in it, so if you don't want to be spoiled, it may be a good idea to stop right here. Death March to the Parallel World Rhapsody is one of those animes that I've seen plenty of people give crap because they get too bothered by its technical side of things. This anime is a niche on top of a niche. An isekai with an overpowered character that ultimately turns out to be a slice of life within a fantasy world. While I can see where some of them are coming from with their critique of it, this anime is a good choice to wind down when you're between animes, but are uncertain on what you want to watch. The series follows Ichiro Suzuki, a 29-year-old programmer who is working on 2 games while trying to get them out before their deadline. He often gets overworked a lot and is prone to have vivid dreams. So when he goes to bed after his latest project was completed, he wakes up to find himself inside of a fantasy world that's a hybrid of both of the games that he's been working on. Starting off with some single-use skills and an item to reveal the map, he discovers that there's a large horde of lizardmen coming his way, and this leads him to finding out that this world is not quite the dream that he thought it was, seeing as he can feel the pain from their attacks. This leads him to panicking and using all 3 of his single-use skill items, which destroys the horde and skyrockets his level beyond imaginable belief, and promptly begins the story for him. For the rest of this review, I refer to Ichiro as Sato, since that's the name he goes by for most of the story, because it's the name of his character in the game. Death March plays around with the fact that Sato is overpowered so it can keep a nice, relaxed pace to it, and that's where the niches come into play for the series. The overpowered nature of Sato gets rid of any tension that conflict would bring about, which may be a downside for some, but seeing as the series feels like it's more of a slice of life than anything, I feel it complements it. After coming to terms with it, Sato feels refreshed because of this new world. He was an overworked person who constantly went on death marches to get games out before their deadlines, and he comes to this world and decides to do something that's very different from what most people usually do in isekais. Settle down in the world and live like a somewhat normal person. Along the way of Sato's journey in this world, he comes across a lot of girls that become his party companions. But don't let that scare you off. While this is a harem of sorts, Sato doesn't feel any romantic feelings towards these girls. He only ever sees them as his family since he constantly rejects their feelings towards them, and is often being shown expressing his feelings towards the more mature women in the series. The girls that serve as the rest of the main cast are pretty disappointing. They aren't really as important as the series wants you to believe, which leads to some odd interactions. The biggest letdown of it is that they're pretty one-dimensional, only there to really serve the purpose of being cute or giving Sato a reason to do anything. While that is a pretty big flaw, it's something that can be overlooked unless you're really bothered by it. Out of all the characters, the only ones that really feel well-rounded enough are Zena Marienthal and Arisa, but this by no means means that their writing is great, since they are still pretty flawed. Zena is a female knight who Sato runs across within the first episode. She's got a predictable personality, but she's also a bit charming as she's a self-sacrificing type of character, but that part of her is handled quite well. The times she pops up in the story, she is gradually getting better as a character, even becoming one of the better developed characters within the series. Arisa is a human who has been reincarnated to this world, and through her, we get to learn a bit of new information about it. While she's not as one-dimensional as the other characters, she's one that can be a bit of an annoyance, considering she's used for some pretty badly done scenes in the anime that just makes you feel weird for watching it. As you watch the anime more, you'll notice that Sato ends up gaining spells pretty quickly. Because of this place being a game world of sorts and him being one of the developers, he has the ability to learn spells as he sees them being used or even performing basic actions. But he mostly uses them to make his life more comfortable. This ability of his makes life fairly easygoing, which Sato tries to keep by masquerading as a merchant every chance he gets. As this is an isekai series, it still has these moments of heroism, but because of Sato's circumstances, they always end pretty quickly when he gets involved. The story of the anime is very straightforward, but it's really stiff in places. The latter episodes really take a toll on how the plot is structured, and because of the additional characters that are added per arc, you can't really get any sort of enjoyment from most of the characters. Because of the flaws in the story, at times the anime feels like it tries to take on a bit too much, which causes some contradictions within Sato's will. Death March's third arc is the one that hurts my score the most for the series. It feels really slow despite it being probably one of the faster paced arcs, because it's the one arc in the entire series that is really hurt by the overpowered nature of the main character. The meat of the arc consists of Sato going alone and fighting enemies as he attempts to save a newly introduced character from a newly introduced villain. It very much feels like the arc is just there to progress the plot, and that's why I don't really like this part of the series. The only real good it brings about, besides some interesting scenes, is that the newly introduced character is a cute fluff piece to the series, but that's not really everyone's cup of tea. The final arc in the series brings about a much better feeling to the anime, and works well as a send-off, albeit a very open one. While there's nothing too noteworthy about the arc, it's where most of the slice of life feeling comes into play. This arc also serves its purpose as trying to drum up some interest in the season 2, and while it is interesting, its execution really falls short. Death March is an average series, in most cases you could probably argue that it's above average, but it's got plenty of flaws that are pretty noticeable. More experienced viewers would say that it has an identity crisis because it doesn't really know what it wants to be. Its adventure is definitely there, and plenty of it at that, but this series doesn't really even need to be an isekai. The story could take place in any setting and it'd be acceptable, so that can be a positive or a negative depending on who you are. One of the more major flaws of the series is that there's not really much to it, and if there was, it would just be in the second season since this season feels like setup, albeit not a very good one. The best way to enjoy this anime is if you go into it as if it were a slice of life in a fantasy world, because it feels more like it belongs in that genre rather than where it is. So, who's this anime really for? Well, if you're looking for something to enjoy, this is a pretty decent one, but because of how flawed it is, I can only really recommend it to beginner viewers. If you're like me and your enjoyment isn't really bogged down by the technical components of the series, you should be able to enjoy this, but anyone above the beginner level will start to notice some flaws around the midway point of the series. Death March's art is pretty good most of the time, but there are some times where it's noticeably bad, and coupled with a few moments of bad CGI, I can't really see anyone more experienced enjoying it even as I can be. If you're looking for something similar to this, but something with much better writing and everything else that this series tries to give you, but in a non-isekai setting, I'd highly recommend you to check out the Korean manhwa, The Gamer. Death March has a lot in common with it, but the anime takes its direction a lot differently since the main character starts off overpowered, while, in The Gamer, the main character starts off at level 1 and has a gradual rise to becoming overpowered, giving it a sense of accomplishment rather than making it feel like it was just being handed to him. I love to hear everyone's opinion on this series, especially since it'd be fun to discuss and get to know what in particular people didn't like, or they loved, especially if their opinion differs from mine. I hope that you liked this, and I'd loved it if you came back to my next video so I could pick your brain some more. See you next time.
Her mom is pretty hot though.